go.
But you did a
Yep.
great job.
And then kind
For
of
your
where we ended
contract.
up. Yep.
Six,
Okay.
the first 6, 4, and 4.
Yep. Okay. Good evening, everyone. We are going to get started. I'm going to call to order the Auburn School Committee special meeting of March 13th, 2024. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Start with introductions down here on my right.
Dan Poisson, Ward 5.
Corin McGuigan, Ward 1. Pam Hart, Ward 2.
Pam Albert, at large.
Connie Brown, Superintendent.
Pat Gaudier, Ward 3.
Connor Dufour, Student Representative.
Jillian Dumais, Student Representative.
Mark Conrad, Business Manager.
Sue Doris, Assistant Superintendent.
And Councilman Platts could not be here tonight. I'm going to entertain a motion to enter into executive session pursuant to 1 MRSA 405-6D for the purpose of labor contract negotiations between the Auburn School Committee and the Auburn Education Association. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
Corin, Pam, second. All those in favor? Okay. And yeah, we'll adjourn to the conference room? Yes, please. Okay. Okay, can I entertain a motion to re-enter regular session?
So moved.
Pam, second, Pat. All those in favor? We are back in regular session. Do I have anyone for public participation this evening? Going once. All right. Moving on to our presentation, the continued budget presentation of the 2024-25 Auburn School Department budget, cost centers 6, system administration, 7, school administration, 8, transportation, 9, facilities and capital improvements, debt service revenue, and adult education.
Good evening, everyone. This will be the final night of presentations with one caveat, and that is Jen Tyner, who is the adult ed director, has a conflict with her role as adult ed director in Lewiston tonight, so she is there presenting. She'll be here next week. Right? Okay. And so to begin with, Mark and I are going to present, if we can bring up the slides, AJ, the rest of the cost centers, 6, 7, 8, 9, and then debt. There we go. Thank you. So Article 6 primarily is my office, and it includes things like the board account, the audit, the legal accounts. And I have to tease Mark. Mark, what was our legal bill for last month when you said it couldn't go down?
Well, the month before it was $96, and last month it was $80.
I just love teasing Mark about that. Anyway, and so Article 6 includes a salary increase for my staff. This is in line with the other agreements for the negotiated staff. And then I think we've talked a fair amount about the need for new software for budget, payroll. We are currently on the ADS system, and it's being phased out. It's no longer supported, and we need to move to Munis. And Amanda, where's Amanda? Hi there, Amanda. Amanda has led the effort to do that change, but that is the most significant cost in this article. Any questions on the Superintendent System Administration article? No? All right, moving to Article 7, this is school administration. These are all of the principal's offices. It includes the staff, and that would be the principal. It includes the support staff, secretaries, and so on. We have recently settled, as you know, an agreement with the Administrators Association, and so that is reflected in this article. And we also have rising health insurance costs. For whatever reason, and Mark and I haven't quite figured out why this is yet, we see this in Article 7 and Article 8, that more staff members, more support staff members are accessing our health insurance. And so there's an increased cost for that. Any questions on Article 7? Corin?
When does the health insurance, like when's the renewal period for that? When will we know?
So we know July 1, well, let me back up. So the renewal period is July 1, and we should get our premium increases either the last Friday in March or the first Friday in April. So we won't have those, and that's a really good question because it's pretty important. We have 12% in our budget projected for health insurance premium increases, and each percentage on that mark is $66,000. So it's a pretty big swing. Some years we've made out really well, and other years we've pretty much hit it dead on. So we'll know in about 2 weeks what that premium increase is going to look like for us. Any other questions on Article 7? Okay, Article 8, Mark, transportation, and Dave, you want to come on up as our transportation director?
So I'm going to briefly talk about the increases in that article, and then Mr. Fontaine is going to give you a hiring update because we know that's been an area of concern over time. I think we're playing catch-up this year with the impact of the new contract, the current contract in place. So you can see salary costs are increasing by $92,000. A chunk of that is making sure we budget all of those paid time off days. They now have 18 days. We didn't capture that in the current year's budget. Dr. Brown talked about health insurance. We're not as clear on the why it's going up so sharply for ed techs and secretaries, but for drivers, they received 85% of a single plan, the Plan 1000, prior to the new contract. Now they got 100% of that single plan, and they would pay the difference for upgrading the plan or going to a family plan. So where it used to be 4 or 5 drivers had health insurance, now we only have 4 or 5 who don't have health insurance. So again, we're really catching up in our budget trends with that. And finally, on the increase in repairs, that account has really went up when we didn't have a mechanic. We now have had a mechanic employed for a while, but the reality is we could probably use more than one mechanic, and they're so difficult to find that we, at this point, are just looking to contract out the additional work when it's necessary. We also have to contract out some things we just can't do, particularly around electronics, and we also are not an inspection station, so we have to contract that out as well. I think the good news is we have a very good mechanic, and our buses are in very good shape and doing well with inspections, which we know is important. So with that, I'll ask Dave to give us an update on hiring.
So right now, we just lost one more driver, a spare driver this week, getting done next week. But we've been keeping an even keel. We haven't missed any runs this year. We've been able to service every school every day, and so we're glad about that. We still struggle to get drivers. We've got one with a permit that's going to be hopefully getting his permit this week. Friday he's got his appointment, so that's looking good. Van usage is up a lot. The homeless and special needs is just blossoming. So that's also a struggle with just van drivers. And then the support software is still lacking because of the office support is down. We just don't have anybody right now, and so I'm struggling there. And the state hasn't chosen a vendor for next year yet, which kind of keeps us in limbo, because if we're going to be switching over the summer, that's going to be a big task also.
Okay. Any questions for Mark or Dave?
So the part where you said you were struggling because you have no office staff, are there positions opened
Yes.
for that? Okay. You just haven't gotten anybody to...
We have 2 secretarial positions open, administrative assistants. And to give you an example, we had one for a few weeks, and then she got offered a job at a significantly higher hourly rate. So, you know, we're just as our schools are struggling with different positions, we're struggling there too.
Thanks, Mark. Anybody else? Very good. Up next, Article 9. Thanks, Dave.
Okay, so Article 9 is maintenance. This is the one article that's actually going down by $385,000, and there are a number of reasons for that we'll review in a minute. I do want to note, it may seem more like an accounting change, but next year the city will actually be managing all of those accounts in their own accounting system and simply send us a monthly bill. So over time, you're not going to see many accounts in Article 9. You'll see debt service, a few related to technology, and then a large account for $3.7 million next year, which will incorporate all of repairs and staffing and all of that. We will have the appropriate details so we can verify those costs and how they're being expensed, but that will be a big change in our accounting. Next slide.
Well, hang on for a second. Any questions about Article 9?
Well, next
So
slide,
far?
yeah. We're still on Article 9, the next slide. So this is the detail of what's driving down the costs. We do see an increase in cleaning and supplies. We had a one-time cost for the transition with the high school with moving. Utilities are going down significantly, and I think that's a couple of different issues. We did well in bidding out our utility costs for next year. We've also got a better handle on the costs of the utilities for the new high school, because that's a large building. We really didn't know what that was going to look like. And your first year is always inefficient as you work towards completing the controls and balancing things out. So we should be in a much better position for that next year. For debt service, this is unusually high decrease, and that's because you actually had a bond from 2013-14 drop out next year. This year, we're paying $147,000 on that bond, and then it's paid off. And we haven't been taking on additional bonds in the last 2 years, so there's nothing coming into play to offset that. So we do see a large decrease there. Next slide. So we've had a lot of conversation recently about our Harriman study and the projection of over $61 million in long-term capital improvement costs. I think it was important to recognize that here because that will have a significant impact on your budget over time. Typically, you had bonded $1 to $2 million a year for capital improvements. In the last 2 years, we haven't requested any bonds, in large part because of the high school project, as we absorbed the cost of that additional bonding into our budget, and our manpower was also stretched with that school coming online. That's going to change in coming years. So if we move to the next slide. So we are making a request for 3 projects for next year, totaling $983,000. And this is based on discussions with Harriman and EEI and what they see the most critical issues being, and then a more recent request on the fire alarm panel at Park Ave. So we really have a backlog of capital maintenance that has to be done, and you're going to find as we each year present these projects, you don't have a lot of discretion in approving them because they're really necessary to keep the school up and running. And fortunately, you've really done a great job as you came off of the high school project, taking the time to work with Harriman and EEI this year to really figure out what your roadmap is and what your priorities need to be. And now you've got a facilities committee that's looking at that in more detail. As we look at these 3 projects, the fire alarm panel wasn't even on our list until a month ago when we got a call from Sean Marston, our facilities supervisor, saying the panel there was reaching the end of its useful life and they were increasing service calls, and our vendor was recommending that it be replaced for the coming year. If we can go to the next slides, we'll talk in more detail about the other 2. So just as we're looking at transitioning software on our accounting system, we need to transition software on our HVAC systems, and HVAC stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning. And as you can imagine, those are complex systems that really run with software. It's crucial for not only keeping your systems running, but for efficiency. And the current software we have with Siemens, who we'd had for over 20 years, isn't even supported any longer. I mean, it's, ADS is still supported at least for a few more years. This isn't even supported, so we really don't have a choice. The value in migrating in the direction we're going is it will be a much more open system, so over time we'll be able to service our HVAC systems with multiple contractors, which you keep your costs down and improve service. I would also note that our ESSER 3 grant is a significant source of funding for this. It's actually almost a $600,000 effort, but improving ventilation systems was one of the key goals of your pandemic-related funds, and we've taken advantage of that. And when we asked EEI and Harriman what their #1 priority was for next year, it was replacing the entire boiler room at Fairview. So if you look at that slide, if you look in the center where you see the hot water heater, notice the water all around the floor. Okay, if we go to the next slide, on the left you can see water on the floor around one of the 2 boilers, and on the right you can see water on the floor around the corroded pipes. Everything is leaking in that room. The pipes are badly corroded, and you really have no choice but to move forward with that. In fact, earlier tonight, the Finance Committee made a recommendation, you'll see next week, to pre-purchase the boilers and hot water heaters so we can stay on track to getting the work done this summer. The pricing on the boiler room may come down a little bit. They're still finalizing their pricing, but it won't have a large impact on the budget because the $1 million bond you'd be requesting, you only have 1 interest payment next year at about under $17,000. So it actually doesn't have a large impact on the budget to the following year.
Questions?
Hi, I do have a question about the 5-year CIP costs. So all the costs there are based on the Harriman study, but those are not set in stone. Those could either go up or down depending on if we start doing these projects. And these are projects that we need to choose to do, or we need to go over the the study before we
So-
do this?
Well, I think the Facilities Committee will be reviewing that with Harriman in their next meeting, but essentially, they've done a couple things. They've organized price increases in their projections, and they've also organized it by immediate needs, short-term needs of 1 to 3 years, and longer-term needs of 3 to 5 years. Your immediate needs are about 2.6 million, so they're manageable. I would also note it's very rare you would see a municipality or a school system tackle everything that's recommended within the time frame. This is going to stretch out beyond there, but it will at least allow you to start looking at your most immediate needs. The one thing I will say is you're not going to be able to just bond $1 to $2 million anymore. You're going to have to think about ratcheting that up over time pretty quickly, even if you come in under the 61 million.
The other question I have is for the controls migration as far as the HVAC systems. As you said, with the pandemic, we had to look at our HVAC systems and had to look at, did we retrofit any of those so that now
Well,
they're still working well,
Yeah,
or are they all
let-
just?
Let me be a little more articulate in what I was saying. So we actually, exclusive of these costs, we actually brought in a company to balance out, make sure our systems were functioning and balanced out. They did testing in individual classrooms and other spaces, and that was about $36,000. So we were sure that our systems were functioning. The most difficult systems were at Edward Little, which is now, of course, in a much better place. So our systems are functioning, but they're just beginning to age out over time, and you're going to reach a point where you can't get parts, which was the case with the Walton rooftop gym unit last year. But we were able to write a specific, you have to write individual programs in the grant. We were able to write a program several years ago to say we were going to upgrade our software controls because we knew this was something that was coming. And more recently, we've been able to shift some of the priorities to increase that. So we've got a good chunk of that coming out of the grant now, in addition to the other work we've done.
Anybody else? Debt. Article 10.
Okay, so you've seen some of these slides before on debt service. So when we talk about state-approved projects, you have really two categories of debt service. You have your capital improvement plans that are in Article 9, and those are your the bonds you go forth with the city for local projects. And then you have your state-approved debt service projects, which are your large-scale renovations or replacements. So for us, it includes Park Ave, which has just 2 more years left on that bond, and Edward Little. So next year in FY25, Edward Little is going up by $85,000. Typically, you'd see that going down, but next year is your first interest payment on that $4.6 million PCB bond. As you look at this, you also can't assume that that's your tax impact because the state will mirror your debt service, your state subsidy payments on the debt service with your expenses. And in the case of the third bond for the PCB abatement, they're picking up 100% of that. So the next slide will really show you what the local impact is because this is the local portion of those bonds. So there's a small portion of Park Ave that's local, and there's about 12% of the Edward Little bonds, first and second bonds, not the PCB abatement, but the other bonding, about 12% of that is local, and you can see that continues to go down each year, again, largely because your interest costs are starting to decline, and you've already built your principal costs into the budget. Of course, your total debt service will start going back up again as you incorporate in your capital improvement needs we talked about earlier.
Shall I go back just to debt service? Anybody have any questions on that one before we go on to revenue? Pat?
I'm not sure how to phrase this question, but is this an average or is this lower because we have limited ourselves to Edward Little and Park Avenue?
Well, first of all, this slide only pertains to Park Avenue and Edward Little, the state-approved projects. You're going down next year by over roughly $150,000 on your Article 9 debt service because you aren't taking on any new debt, so you don't, for example, next year you don't have any new principal payments coming due, but you had a 10-year bond that's dropping out this year that had an annual principal payment of $145,000 plus some interest. So that's why I say that piece is what's going to go back up is your Article 9 capital improvement bonds as you start taking that on. So if you take on $1 million 10-year bond, and they tend to be 10 years, this next year you only have say a $17,000 interest payment. The following year, that's going to go up by at least $100,000 plus more interest as that kicks in. So FY26, you'll see that start to go back up.
So it's going to be tough to pay, to follow what the Harriman is suggesting. And I know it's been tough over the last several years because we've had other studies where they've suggested that we spend a simple amount of money and then we just don't have the funds to do it.
Again, I don't think you're necessarily going to spend $61 million in the next 5 years, but here's what you're going to see happening. This is a discussion we had earlier in the Finance Committee. If you look at all three of the projects for capital improvements next year, all three of them are crucial to keeping your schools open. I mean, we have software that's not supported, we have boilers leaking, we have a fire alarm panel that's at the end of its useful life. You're going to work with Harriman and EEI to establish your priority plans, and you're going to have something fail. So I think you're going to find you have to start putting more money into this simply because some of your systems are aging out to the point where they can't get parts or they're going to fail on short notice, and they'll limp it along for the year, but you're going to have to replace it the next year.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Revenue.
Okay, so I'll just briefly touch on adult ed, and Jen Tyner will be here next month. What you'll notice with revenue for adult ed is the state subsidy is up significantly, so that was a priority of the legislature. According to Jen, and she can speak to this next week, this really moves funding further to where it was years ago, and she would like to use it to expand programming. You'll see local assessment is held even, and one of the considerations in that is that under the state formula, apparently, if you reduce your local share, they will reduce your state subsidy 2 years hence. So we didn't want to get into a cycle of reducing the local assessment only to find 2 years later we're finding our state subsidy going down. So Ms. Tyner can answer more detailed questions on that next week, but that was the thinking there. So here's our summary of our operating budget revenue. You can see state subsidy increasing and local assessment increasing. I'll discuss those with some more detailed slides in a moment. Under other, you have a whole list of different accounts that includes your main care, your Franklin tuition revenue, gate receipts, miscellaneous revenue. We do have a projection for that going up next year, largely because we're increasing the Franklin tuition projection for revenue, so that's a good thing. Naming rights revenue, the fundraising committee was able to, with the help of the amazing class of, was it 1951, raise $400,000 in naming rights for the auditorium, the Performing Arts Center. We raised another $11,000 for naming rights for classrooms or conference room. And so the intent of that was to reduce the fiscal impact of the high school, and we're staying true to that. So this year we're using $200,000, and next year we're proposing to use the remaining balance. It does mean that in fiscal year 26, that's going to disappear. So just need to be aware of that. And then we'll get into more detail on the fund balance in a moment. So under revenue for state subsidy, the general subsidy is going up $1.6 million, more than $1.65 million. What's interesting in that, and this is follow-up from a question from Mr. Platts last week, which you have in your in the questions and answers, which are up on our website, so you can see the answers to your questions there. 1 million of that is an increase in special ed reimbursements. So as your costs go up in special ed, there's a lag, but you do get an increase in the reimbursement. So special ed is a significant part of that. So of that 29 million. Next year, special ed is 9.7 million, just for that. And you can see a small increase in the debt service, again, largely because of the third bond for 4.6 million for the high school. Okay, so this is the one that interests everyone, the local assessment. So the first line is what we're required to raise to meet our match for this full state subsidy. The second one is your local-only debt service, which is going down. And then your third one is really the account that balances out the budget, and that's your additional local share. Overall, your local assessments are going up 5.5%. And then we get to the fund balance. And we've had discussions about this before. So the concern with use of the fund balance is always that as you use it up, you can hit a funding cliff when it's no longer available. So, you know, you could use $5 million next year, and then next year it's not going to be there. And so you're just creating a funding cliff for yourself. So we try to be cautious in recommending use of fund balance. You're currently using $2 million. We're recommending next year the use of $2,350,000, and then over the last 2 years, and recommended into next year, would be using $250,000 in additional fund balance funds into your two reserve accounts, your technology account and your Edward Little capital reserve. But if you'll notice, you know, you're using 2.6 million there of 5.5 million. That's like half of your available fund balance. It means that you would have to have sharp decreases in future years after that. But what you don't know is what you also have in year-to-year surpluses. Like, we've got $2 million we've dedicated to this year's revenue. We have a surplus, you're not going to use all of that, so that would help bring your fund balance back up. So that's really the conversation to have on the fund balance. And finally, I just wanted to note, in each of the last 2 years, you've had 2 articles for the reserve accounts. They've been established, but you need voter approval to authorize you to transfer year-end surpluses into those reserve accounts. So what's nice about those articles is it's authorizing you, but you can wait until the late summer or fall to make that decision about whether you want to use those funds for that purpose after you know what the prior year's surplus looks like. So it just gives you authorization. I would note, and for those of you who were on the prior school committee, you may recall we had a discussion and you approved establishing a curriculum development reserve account for $268,000, and Dr. Doris had detailed how those funds would be used looking out over a number of years, so it was really long-term planning. Amanda and myself met with our auditors to determine how to treat all of those dollars in our budget. There was that, and then there was $500,000 for the iPads that we've already used, another $500,000 for the high school. And we need to put a budget article to the voters if you want to make that non-lapsing. And what that means is, okay, you've devoted $268,000 for the curriculum development reserve, but at June 30th, that sunsets unless you bring it to the voters in an article. So we would be asking you to approve that to carry forward the decision of the prior school committee for the use of those funds, or you could determine a different decision, but if you want that to be in a non-lapsing reserve account, you're going to have a budget article for that. And I
think that's it.
That's it.
Okay, questions regarding revenue? Yeah.
So it's about the fund balance. I don't know if I'm recalling this correctly, but do we have to have a certain percentage in the fund balance, or we aren't supposed to go above a certain percentage?
Yes, you're the latter. So right now, what the state says is you shouldn't go beyond 9% of your operating budget in the fund balance you carry. And that's why we came to the Finance Committee and brought a recommendation to the School Committee to spend anything above that 9%. It's really a rolling 3-year process. So what they say is you have 3 years to spend it down to the 9%. So it's a rolling number. I would also note that over the next few years, that's going to go down to 5%, I think. And that's what prompted the expenditure of those excess fund balance funds. That $1,268,000 was not a random number. That was how much we have in fund balance over the audited fiscal year 2022 balance.
Are there questions regarding revenue? No, anybody else? Well, just to set the stage for next week, which is decision time for the committee, and some recommendations for us. This, as I said, concludes the last of our presentations. Jen Tyner will do adult ed, but adult ed is treated somewhat outside of the regular operating budget. And we will be asking the committee to deliberate and let us know if you are comfortable with the information that you've presented, if you are ready to go forward to the public hearing, which is April 3rd, and prior to that, the council meeting, which is April 1st. So we'll need that information from you. On the 20th, you'll be asked to support the CIP projects that have been presented tonight. So this is the opportunity for you folks to let us know if you are satisfied with what you've heard and comfortable moving forward, or if there's some place that you would like us to make changes. I'd be happy to entertain any questions at this point. Do you have a question? Well, it really gives you a week to think about it. You know, what we've been doing throughout the whole project is capturing your questions, as Mark said. I'm giving you back the answers if we have them that night. If we don't, we come back the next week. They go on the web. It's been a very transparent process. And I think that the staff is well informed. I know I put out a Sunday night newsletter, and information about the budget goes into that. So we feel like everything we know, you know. But now we need to hear from you regarding what you want to see for the 24-25 year, what you want to go to the council. So I'll give you some time to think about that. And if you have questions prior to next Wednesday, please don't hesitate to email me or email Mark, and we'll get those answers back to you.
So basically, we all need to go home and do our homework and come back prepared next week with any outstanding questions.
Yes.
Yep.
That's right. I mean, there are a couple of opportunities going forward that you don't have to vote, but we do need to know from the committee now if we're headed in the right direction, or if there are some big changes that you would like to see, because we are, believe it or not, through our presentations.
Anyone have any last questions or comments? Oh, go ahead, Pat.
Do you have a sense of what the city council will be willing to accept?
We have been watching their meetings, and I've met with the city manager, so they're going through this process as well. I think there's a general understanding, I don't want to speak for them, that costs have gone up, and whether it's labor costs or utility costs or other things, it is getting more expensive to provide the services for the city of Auburn. And I know that's true for the city side, and I've shared our information. It's true for us. I feel like we're doing well in Auburn compared to some of the surrounding districts. There are districts out there with double-digit increases. Probably seen those articles in the paper. Auburn has a reputation for being very frugal, very cost-minded, and I haven't heard yet any arbitrary numbers that it can't be exceeded. From what I've been told, if you can justify what you're asking for, then we have the credibility to go forward with that request.
Okay, and that presentation to the city council is April 1st.
Yes. And according to the city manager, that is more of a dialogue, as it has been in the past. I will provide the committee with talking points, but it will not be a PowerPoint presentation. It's really going to be a discussion.
I have a question, and I don't know if this is the right time or the right place to ask about this, but I was kind of just made aware that the middle school no longer has language classes. And I guess I was just wondering, I don't know if I should have asked this before the budget presentations, but I did not know about it. Is how much would it cost to reinstate a language program at the middle school, including Spanish and French, which is what we have at the high school? I don't know if, again, I don't know if this is the right time to
We
ask
can
that.
certainly pose the question. A ballpark for one language would be about $100,000. And the reason that decision was made was because we could not staff the high school language program, the Spanish program, and we made an administrative decision that the high school was the greater need, and so we moved the teacher. And we just were not able to find a middle school teacher. And Mr. Wilson had other needs at that time, and that's where the resource went.
Quick question about, since you've been here as superintendent, how many budgets have you been given, like, been able to raise, have that increase? Just asking for the public to know that we haven't been able to, increase our budgets.
I think we've made good progress. We've had modest increases over the last 4 years. I would remind folks that we cut 15 teaching positions last year. And I think in the former mayor words, that was to sort of right the ship. I don't have another 15 positions to offer up anymore. You've heard what the class sizes are. A lot of those positions were at the elementary level. And I think you've been presented with a fair and reasonable budget request. It's been justified. We need these things. We run lean and mean in Auburn. And as you know, because you just ratified a contract agreement, 80% of our costs are related to personnel, and you cannot raise personnel costs 5%, 6%, 7% and not have it reflected in your budget someplace.
Any other questions? Thank you to you both.
You're welcome.
I will just say that in my years being on the school committee, the budget presentation has always been extremely thorough and transparent and very easy to understand, which I think we all appreciate. So thank you to both of you and your staff. Okay, moving on to new business. Can I entertain a motion to ratify the collective bargaining agreement between the Auburn School Committee and the Auburn Education Association Transportation Unit? Do I have
So
a
moved.
motion? Corin, do I have a second?
Second.
Dan? All those in favor? Motion passes. We have a list of upcoming meetings. There are a couple edits to our list of upcoming meetings on the agenda. Just a note that we did not have the March 12th Building Subcommittee meeting that is listed there. That got moved to April.
I think it's April 9th or
Okay,
something like that.
April 9th. And the March 16th Special School Committee meeting for the finalist interviews for the Superintendent of Schools is going to start at 9 a.m., not at 10:30. And then the April 1st Health and Safety Subcommittee meeting has been moved to Monday, April 8th, because of the joint meeting with the City Council that's happening April 1st at 5:30. And I believe that is it. Do I have any future agenda items and requests for information? Anyone? All right. And with that, I will entertain a motion to adjourn. Do I have a
So
motion?
moved.
Pam? Do I have a second? Corin? All those in favor? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.